Welcome to 52 Book Reviews and Recommendations. Today, we're having a look at Foundation, the Foundation series by Asimov, Isaac Asimov. These are classics, you know. This is some of the foundations of what we know of as sci-fi today is written upon. These books were written in the 50s, and so there was no Star Wars, there was no Star Trek, there was none of this stuff. Instead, a lot of the stuff that we have today stems from this stuff. Isaac Asimov wrote a lot of stuff. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of publications, but he's mostly famous for this Foundation series, and also his sort of robotics books, most famously I, Robot. And it's to the extent where there's he actually was the first one who used and coined the term robotics. We're in the distant future. The empire of mankind stretches all over the galaxy, but there's a scientist called Harry Seldon that has kind of developed a new science called psychohistory, I believe. And it's kind of the history of sociology. He can tell the future, essentially. By looking at how masses of people have acted through the years, he can then see how they're going to act in the future. And he depicts the fall of the human empire and devises a plan to save humanity from a barbaric future or even destruction. Let's see what what it says on the back of the first book here. This is the first volume of Asimov's world-famous trilogy, one of the great classics of science fiction. The time is a future century in the world of the galactic empire, a society of 1,000,000 worlds throughout the Milky Way. The old empire is crumbling into barbarism, and Harry Seldon and his band of psychologists see before them only the despair of thousands of years of anarchy, unless they can create a new force. The Foundation, dedicated to art, science, and technology, the nucleus of a new empire. The epic story of Foundation is continued in Foundation and Empire and Second Foundation, both available at Panther Books. There we are. These books are sort of loosely based or inspired by a famous historian. I can't remember the name of him right now. I'll put it in the text. Who wrote books about the decline and fall, the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. It was written hundreds of years ago. And this is kind of, taking on that, but putting it into the future. Let's read a little bit from the first book. I'm going to jump ahead just a few pages. We're on page 9. The ship landed in a medley of noises. There was a far-off hiss of the atmosphere cutting and sliding past the metal of the ship. There was the steady drone of conditioners fighting the heat of friction, and the slower rumble of the engines enforcing deceleration. There was the human sound of men and women gathering in the debarkation rooms, and the grind of the hoist lifting baggage, mail and freight, to the long axis of the ship, from which they would be later moved to the unloading platform. Gall felt the slight jar that indicated the ship no longer had independent motion of its own. Ship's gravity had been giving way to planetary gravity for hours. Thousands of passengers had been sitting patiently in the debarkation rooms, which swung easily on yielding force fields to accommodate its orientation to the changing direction of the gravitational forces. Now they were crawling down curving ramps to the large yawning locks. Gall's baggage was minor. He stood at the desk as it was quickly and expertly taken apart and put together again. His visa was inspected and stamped. He himself paid no attention. This was Trantnor. The air seemed a little thicker here, but the gravity a bit greater than the one on his home planet of Synax. But he would get used to that. He wondered if he would get used to the immensity. debarkation building was tremendous. The roof was almost lost in the heights. Gall could almost imagine the clouds could form beneath its immensity. He could see no opposite wall, just men and desks covering floor till it faded out in haze. The man at the desk was speaking again. He sounded annoyed. He said, "Move on, Dornick." He had to open the visa, look again before he remembered the name. Gall said, Where? The man at the desk jerked a thumb. Taxis on the right and a third left. Gall moved, seeing the glowing twists of air suspended high in nothingness and reading taxis to all points. A figure detached itself from anonymity and stopped at the desk as Gall left. The man at the desk looked up and nodded briefly. The figure nodded in return and followed the young immigrant. He was in time to hear Gall's destination. Gall found himself hard against the railing. The small sign said supervisor. The man whom the sign referred to did not look up. He said, "Where to?" Gall wasn't sure, but even a few seconds' hesitation meant men queuing in line behind him. The supervisor looked up. "Where to?" Gall's funds were low, but there was only this one night, and then he would have a job. He tried to sound nonchalant. "A good hotel, please." The supervisor was unimpressed. "They're all good. Just name one." Gall said desperately, "The nearest one, please." The supervisor touched a button. A thin line of light formed along the floor, twisting among others, which brightened and dimmed in different colors and shades. A ticket was shoved into Gall's hands. It glowed faintly. The supervisor said, 1.12. Gall fumbled for the coins. He said, "Where do I go?" "Follow the light. The ticket will keep glowing as long as you point it in the right direction." Gall looked up and began walking. There were hundreds creeping across the vast floor, following their individual trails, sifting and straining themselves through intersection points to arrive at their respective destinations. His own trail ended. A man in glaring blue and yellow uniform, shining and new in unstainable plastotextile, reached for his 2 bags. "Direct to the Luxor," he said. The man who followed Gall heard that, but he also heard Gall say, "Fine," and watched him enter the blunt-nosed vehicle. The taxi lifted straight up. Gall stared out the curved, transparent window, marveling at the sensation of air flight within an enclosed structure, and clutched instinctively at the back of the driver's seat. The vastness contracted, and the people became ants in random distribution. The scene contracted further and began to slide backwards. There was a wall ahead. It began high in the air and extended upward out of sight. It was riddled with holes that were mouths of tunnels. Gall's taxi moved toward one, then plunged into it. For a moment, Gall wondered idly how his driver could pick out one among so many. There was now only blackness, with nothing but the past flashing of colored signal lights to relieve the gloom. The air was full of a rushing sound. Gall leaned forward against deceleration then, and the taxi popped out of the tunnel and descended to ground level once more. "The Luxor Hotel," said the driver, unnecessarily. He helped Gall with his baggage, accepted a 10th credit tip with a businesslike air, picked up a waiting passenger, and was rising again. In all this, from the moment of debarkation, there had been no glimpse of sky. Now, as always, this is just to give you a bit of a taste of the language. This obviously continues into a bit more of sort of galactic adventure and stuff like that. But as I said, the storyline continues. It continues over many, 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 many years. The perspective of this is huge, of how Harry Seldon's plan tries to save humankind from becoming, well, maybe something like the Warhammer 40k universe, for instance. It's always good to stay away from that from time to time. Every time I've read these books, I've come like halfway. I consider them being one book. And then I've sort of started reading other things, and then I've had to pick it up and keep going, because this is, there is a difference with something that's written in the 50s. That the language is beautiful, as you've heard, but it's a different kind of pace. And sometimes today, we read books with just so much action. It's just so high paced. And so if you want to read the foundation, it's probably good to plan it, not start reading it right after you read that super exciting, high-paced book, or start reading it, take a break, keep on reading it. I love it because there's so much in here that just feels, in a way, you know, the descriptions of something futuristic that back then when this was written and inspired was very much sort of kind of an underground comic scene, perhaps, I don't know. And it's just taken into a serious place of a wonderful world and great descriptions. And it's in these descriptions, there's like, you know, people smoke cigarettes still, which is, you know, judging from what's happened from then to now, you know, a lot of people stopped smoking cigarettes. In the 50s, everyone smoked cigarettes. So everyone's still smoking cigarettes, these, you know, 30,000 years into the future or whatever this is. But instead they have atomic ashtrays, you know, atomic fueled, you know, just grab your little cigarette and put it down your atomic incinerator ashtray, which is just so much fun. And when they travel through space at like light speed or whatever, the way it's described, you know, I'm convinced that George Lucas was sitting there, you know, taking notes. Okay, this is what traveling at light speed looks like. Lots of more inspiration, like the Dune books. They're also old, but they're also kind of inspired by these worlds created and maybe turned around on its heel, but it's inspired so much, and it's still a great read. It's fun, you know. He's got tech priests in here. There's a lot of fun stuff. Warm recommendation. Just remember that it's paced at a, you know, more reflective pace. The twists and turns are maybe not as dramatic and sharp in the way as books are today, but definitely something to have in your bookshelf at home, especially when they look this pretty. Isaak Asimov's Foundation Books. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Also, if you enjoy these recommendations, you can help the channel out by buying me a coffee. I drink a lot of coffee. So there's a link down below where you can buy me a coffee. Thanks, and see you in the next one. Bye.